ladies. My name is Carrie Stratton. I've been at Life Point for almost a year now, and I serve in kindergarten on Wednesday nights at Kid Life, and my husband serves in the youth. And I have two kiddos. I have a daughter that's 5, and I have a son that's almost 1. And you are all my new friends, but this is my new friend,
Ryan. And we've been at Life Point for almost 2 years. And my husband and I serve in the movers class, first service on Sunday mornings. And we have 3 boys, 6 and 2. And I homeschool them, and my husband works out of the home. And that's about it.
So we're really excited to talk with you about some of the questions that we discussed today in our groups and Bible study. And so the first thing that we talked about is just an intro question of who do you look up to and why? And we heard a variety of answers. For me personally, I kind of have a tendency in 2 areas. One is, women whose faith I admire, women who are older than me, like my mom or my grandma. But then there's also just women in the church who I see they have different gifts and things that I admire. Some of them are really strong in prayer. Some of them are really strong in parenting, in the way that they educate their children. Just so many areas, the way they keep their house really clean. But there are lots of ways that I admire and look up to women.
Yeah. Mine was kind of similar. I have a lady that I look up to a lot from our co-op, from homeschool, and she just always seems like she has like everything all together and is always pointing everyone to Jesus. And I'm like, oh, I want to be that. But I've also had, people in my past. My youth pastor's wife was one of them, who I really just admired their, constant faith, and really have looked up to that because I haven't had that always in my background. So.
And then one of the things we talked about, we went from there to, why was it important for the Hebrews to know that Jesus was better than Moses? And we talked about that, Moses would have been a very significant figure to them, and he communed with God, so he would have been very elevated in their minds, and about how Jesus was so much better than that. And so we also talked about the flip side of that. Why would it be dangerous to put someone on a pedestal or to look up to our leaders too much? And one of the things that came up in our group was just that it can cause us to, it really causes us to expect something from that person that they're not able to give us, because we looked at Numbers where Moses was commanded to speak to the rock, and instead he strikes the rock. And just an example of how he was sinful and fallible, just like these other people that we look up to. And so if we are expecting something from them that we can't give them, we may transfer that to God and say, oh, well, that person let me down. I think God let me down. And so that was where we landed on what was dangerous about that.
Yeah, we also kind of hit on that, and we also talked about how you can put maybe a ministry even on a pedestal, or a leader, in the church, and we forget that they are just human, and when they fall, it might cause you to fall. And if you put, there's lots of different podcasts and stuff that I listen to and books that I read, and sometimes their take on theology, I just take it as gospel truth, and that's what I stand on. And then sometimes I look back and I'm like, maybe I should have checked that with, what God says about himself. Because even a great man or woman of God is able to fall and is able to get things wrong. So on, question 2, we talked about, Moses hitting the rock for the water. And then it says, where are you tempted to place your confidence in something or someone other than God? And what hardness of heart might this be revealing in you? And so I like to put my confidence in myself a lot. I like to think that we talked a lot about our children's salvation, and how I like to put it on myself that if I just homeschool them the right way, and if I teach them the right things and send them to church as often as possible, then they're just bound to be saved. And I tend to forget that that's God's work. and I'm not the Holy Spirit. And I'm simply called to be obedient to Him and to care for my kids, and yes, train them in the way they should go, but ultimately that's God's job, to bring them into Him.
For me, I have this tendency to have in my mind a way that something should go. I have my plan, and if it doesn't go that way, then I can start to think, well, I think God kind of let me down there. And I can see it in big and small areas. Big being like, losing a loved one, and I didn't think it should go that way. And there have been times where I felt angry and bitter towards the Lord, and I allow my heart to be hard because of that. But I see that same, like that's a big example, but I see even in smaller areas, like I shared this with my group that my son, he's almost 1, and he just still doesn't always sleep through the night. And I think that he should. And when he doesn't, I can feel frustrated and angry or bitter about that, or about what I'm doing the next day without my sleep. And what that reveals in me is that I have an expectation that I should get that amount of sleep. And the Lord has really kind of changed my heart and sanctified me with Him just showing me. He's changed the way I pray to now, can I just, Lord, would you give me enough sleep to do what you've given me to do the next day? And really, it's an act of submission of my will and my plans is what that is. But when I do that, I have much more peace. It changes my heart. My heart is soft towards the Lord. And this kind of streamlines into the next question that Ryan's going to take. But for me, it also shows an area of unbelief, and just that it keeps me from resting in Him. And that's the next question.
Right. So let's see. It was talking about in Matthew 11 when Jesus says His yoke is easy, His burden is light. And then the applied question on that was talking about our unbelief. And let's see. Is that the right one? So I tend to really like my productivity and my to-do list. And God showed me actually like a week ago before this that I was really letting what I did or didn't get done in a day dictate on whether I had a good day or not. And I wasn't letting God into that, and I wasn't looking at the end of the day thinking, what did God do despite me? I was looking at the end of the day thinking, well, what did I get done? And everything that wasn't checked off on my list, well, then I just had a terrible day. Like, it was pointless. And God can really do good things despite us. And so when it was talking about what unbelief keeps you from fully enjoying the rest granted to you, and it was just the unbelief that God is going to do His work His way, and I need to just let that happen. And when we were talking about the yoke in our group, someone really brought up the idea that like a yoke is still a yoke. It's still going to steer you just like it would steer the oxen. It's not just you getting to go run free and do whatever you want, but His yoke is light, and His burden is light, and His yoke is easy. And so we need to focus on what He has called us to do, which is the yoke that He puts on us, and not add all these other things that weren't ours to carry. Sometimes we can even take good things, working out and taking care of our homes and ministering to other people and whatever, and put those extra yokes on, and we're like, wow, God, this isn't light, this isn't easy. But He's like, no, strip all those off, and what I've called you to is obey me, love your neighbor, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So
I don't think I often think of myself as being self-reliant, but if I am not believing in God's truth, then I am trying to rely on myself. And so I might go through a day, and if I am frustrated because I didn't sleep and I'm trying to do all that in my own strength, that's not what He's called me to do. He's called me to rest, that like you said, His rest is easy and His mm-hmm. burden is light. And what He's asked me to do is just submit my heart to Him and to rest in Him. Mm-hmm. And because of that rest, that is where we lead into the next question, looking at Hebrews 4:11 through 13. And the whole study on that day, day 5, I thought was really good because she spent so much time having us look at how each verse leads into the next verse. And that verse 12 that talks about the word being sharper than a two-edged sword, we've heard a lot, but sometimes we hear it out of context.
Yeah.
And I had not really considered the lead-in about rest to that, but it was like I could just see in there the Lord say, like it is possible for you to rest because my word is sharper than a two-edged sword, and it does split bone and marrow, and it does pierce our hearts. And so because the Lord can do that in his word, we are able to rest.
Yeah, we don't have to work and strive to be good enough for him, because his word is good enough for us. It's good enough to sanctify us and purify us. And in the apply part, it was talking about describe a time when the word of God divided you. And it wasn't that long ago that, probably a year or so ago, that God really convicted me that my introvert nature, I was really using as a crutch. And I was being sinful and saying that, well, that's just not my personality. I don't need to, and I wasn't coming to women's events. I wasn't, participating in anything. We would go to community group and I would just kind of sit back and not say much. And God really convicted me that, through his word, it pierced me that we were created for community, and that being an introvert doesn't exclude you from that. We need one another. And in verse, I think it was 13 of chapter 3, it was talking about take care to encourage one another daily. Well, how can you do that if you're not in community with people? If you're not connecting to people around you who are strong in the faith, or who are walking this walk with you, you can't encourage one another because you don't see one another. And so that's when God's word just kind of like pierced me recently and showed me that you can't use being uncomfortable as a crutch anymore. So the wrap-up question, number 5, it says, what aspect of God's character has this week's passage of Hebrews shown you more clearly? And for me, mine was knowing that God is our deliverer shows me that I am free to obey him. So that I know, just like the Israelites, God eventually delivered them into the promised land, into rest. And I will get that rest someday too. And so I'm free to just obey him and be faithful to what he's called me to, and not have to worry about the rest.
And I will just say that the wrap-up this week is one that I struggled with, and I didn't answer it. There were a lot of areas where the Lord spoke to me, but I struggled to put it into that one sentence. Deb mentioned those attributes of God in the back of the book last time, and I just heard her say that in her video this morning. But I thought it was really helpful, so if you struggle with that like me, you might go back and reference that. One of the things I really love about this study is that it's really just us sitting with the word. And she's given us a little guidance about how to meditate on it, but after doing this, if we took this book away, like we could still sit and we could still think on these things and look at how the passage connects to itself, or how there are things repeated, and ask the Lord why that is, and we could still just learn so much by sitting in this way. So I'm excited that we're studying this way, and I hope that you are enjoying it, and we'll see you next week.
All right, bye.